move, the pressure plate triggers.
I know.
2 degrees left, hold for wind. The voice in the earpiece crackled, barely audible over the ringing in her ears. I can't see the heat signature, Martinez. My optics are fried. Lieutenant Graves hissed, his voice tight with a panic he tried to suppress. We are sitting ducks here. If you don't take the shot, we're dead. Sergeant Sophia Martinez didn't reply immediately. She lay motionless in the dust, the barrel of her rifle protruding through a gap in the crumbling shale. Through her scope glass, not digital, she saw the glint. Not a heat signature, but the sun reflecting off an enemy lens. Martinez, engage or we move, Graves yelled. If you move, the pressure plate triggers. Sophia whispered, her heart rate deliberately slowed to 50 beats per minute. And if I shoot, they triangulate me. I won't get off this ridge. We don't have a choice. Sophia closed her eyes for a microsecond, inhaling the dry copper scent of blood and ozone. She knew the math. 1 shot to save 6 men who hadn't wanted her there. 1 shot that would turn her position into a mortar magnet. I know, she said softly. She exhaled. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The air in the hangar at Al-Sara Air Base was thick with the smell of hydraulic fluid and the aggressive, unspoken hierarchy of men who killed for a living. Sergeant Sophia Martinez stood by the loading ramp, her presence almost invisible against the sprawling machinery of war. She adjusted the strap of her drag bag, her movements economical, precise. Check it out. Is that a museum piece, or did you loot a heritage site on the way in? The voice belonged to Petty Officer Miller, a chaotic mass of muscle and chewing tobacco. He was pointing a gloved finger at the rifle case resting at Sophia's feet. Sophia didn't look up. She continued checking the turrets on her scope. It's an M24 chassis, remounted. .300 Winchester Magnum, pointer active bolt action. Miller laughed, a sharp bark that drew the attention of the rest of Echo Team. Sweetheart, we're going into a hot zone, not a deer stand in Wisconsin. You miss your first shot, you don't get a second one with that bolt-cranking garbage. Lieutenant Graves, the team leader, stepped in. He was checking the holographic sight on his MK-20, a semi-automatic beast covered in rails lasers, and a ballistics computer that cost more than Sophia's annual salary. Martinez. Graves said, his voice flat, lacking the joviality of Miller, but carrying twice the condescension. Standard loadout for this op is semi-auto. We need volume of fire if things go dynamic. I can have the armory issue you an SR-25. Light fast integrates with our comms. Sophia finally looked up. Her eyes were dark, tired, but devoid of intimidation. The SR-25 jams in fine silt. The sand in the northern sector is like talcum powder. Bolt action has fewer moving parts. It cycles when dirty. Iwena, it cycles slow. Miller muttered, strapping on a quad-tube night vision helmet that looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. And look at her kit. Where's your plate carrier? Where's your exoframe? Sophia wore a chest rig. No ceramic plates, no hydraulic knee braces, just magazines, water, a map, and a med kit. I need mobility. The elevation changes are steep. The exoframes limit range of motion on vertical climbs. Graves sighed, shaking his head. He looked at her like she was a logistic error he had to sign for. Your funeral, Sergeant. But listen to me closely. When we make contact, you stay behind the heavy guns. Don't slow us down and don't get pinned. I don't have the manpower to carry a casualty who refused to wear armor. Copy that, sir, Sophia said. Her voice was steady, monotone. She watched them gear up. They were technological marvels. They had sensors that detected heartbeats, headsets that filtered out gunshots but amplified whispers, and rifles that could calculate lead on a running target instantly. They looked invincible. Sophia looked down at her rifle. It was scarred, the paint chipped the bolt handle, worn smooth by thousands of cycles. It was simple. It was honest. Wheels up in 5. The crew chief screamed over the winding turbine of the Blackhawk. Sophia grabbed her bag. As she walked up the ramp, Miller bumped her shoulder hard. Try to keep up, antique. She sat near the tail gunner, the vibration of the helicopter rattling her teeth. She closed her eyes. She didn't need to be liked. She didn't need their toys. She just needed the wind to hold and the sand to stay out of her eyes. But as she looked at the confident backs of the SEALs, a cold knot formed in her stomach. They trusted their batteries too much, and batteries died. The helicopter banked hard, leaving the lights of the base behind, plunging them into the absolute darkness of the Yemeni mountains. The insertion was a brutal slap of cold air and vertigo. The Black Hawk didn't touch down. It hovered 6 feet off the shale, kicking up a blinding vortex of dust. Sophia dropped, hitting the ground with a roll that jarred her teeth. Before she could even adjust her rifle sling, the SEALs were already up and moving, their movements enhanced by the hydraulic whine of their lower body exoskeletons. The target area, a jagged spine of rock known as the Al-Hajra Ridge, sat at 7,000 feet above sea level. The air was thin, punishingly dry, and cold enough to freeze sweat against the skin instantly. "Move out! We're burning daylight!" Lieutenant Graves' voice cut through the comms, crisp and digitized. The SEALs moved with an unnatural, loping gait. The exoskeletons took the weight of their 80-pound rucksacks, transferring the load directly to the ground. They looked like predators, efficient and tireless. Sophia, carrying 40 pounds of kit and her M24, had to rely on lung capacity and muscle fiber. She fell into the rear guard position, her breath coming in ragged, controlled bursts. Within 20 minutes, the gap between her and the main element had widened to 10 meters. "Pick it up, Martinez," Miller's voice taunted over the team channel. "Need a tow?" Sophia ignored him. She focused on her footing. The terrain was treacherous, loose scree over hard granite. The SEALs, trusting their powered ankles, crunched through the loose stones. To Sophia's ears, they sounded like a rock slide waiting to happen. Every step they took sent a vibration through the ground, a rhythmic thud-whine-thud from the servos assisting their quadriceps. She moved differently. She placed her feet rolling from the outside edge to the inside, testing the stability of the rock before committing her weight. It was slower, yes, but it was silent. "Hold up," Graves ordered. The column stopped instantly. Sophia caught up her chest, heaving, sweat stinging her eyes. They were at the mouth of a narrow wadi, the entrance to the canyon that led to the crash site. "Thermal check," Graves whispered. Miller and the other assaulters scanned the darkness. Their quad-tube panoramic night vision goggles, PNVGs, gave them a 97-degree field of view, turning the pitch-black night into a white phosphorus daylight. "Clear left," Miller reported. "Clear right, nothing moving. Drone feed shows ambient temperature stable." Another operator added. "Looks like a ghost town," Graves muttered. "Let's push into the throat." "Wait," Sophia said. Her voice was barely a whisper, unamplified by the boom mics the others wore. Graves turned, his silhouette towering over her. "What is it, Sergeant?" Sophia pointed toward a cluster of acacia trees 300 meters up the slope, invisible to the naked eye but outlined in her monocle. "The birds." "What?" Miller scoffed. "Nightjars," Sophia explained, keeping her breathing level. "They are ground-nesting birds. They don't fly at 0200 unless something flushes them out." Something heavy moved through that brush. Graves toggled a switch on his helmet, zooming his optics. "I'm looking right at it, Martinez. No heat signatures, no movement. The drone swept that sector 5 minutes ago." "The drone looks for heat," Sophia insisted, the friction in her voice rising. "If they are using thermal blankets or moving through the lava tubes, the drone won't see them. But the birds felt the vibration. Someone is up there." The lieutenant stepped closer, his face shielded by the dark visor of his helmet. The disdain was palpable. "You're seeing ghosts because you're tired, Martinez. You're hypervigilant. My sensors are worth $3 million. They say it's clear." "Sensors don't have gut instincts, sir. We should flank wide, take the high ground," she argued. "If we go into the wadi, we're in a fatal funnel." "Flanking adds 2 hours to the movement," Graves snapped. "We have a timeline. We are taking the direct route. Get in formation and check your safety." He turned his back on her. The servos in his legs whined as he surged forward, leading his men into the dark mouth of the canyon. Miller passed her, patting his suppressed rifle. "Don't worry, honey. If the birds attack, we'll protect you." Sophia stood still for a second, watching them disappear into the shadows. She felt the cold wind lick the back of her neck, a sensation that had nothing to do with the weather. She looked back at the acacia trees. The birds were gone. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, expectant. She chambered around into her M24, ensuring the bolt closed without a sound. She was right. She knew she was right. But in the military, being right didn't matter if you didn't have the rank to prove it. She stepped into the wadi, following the footprints of the men who were walking straight into the dark. The walls of the canyon rose like jagged teeth on either side of them, blotting out the stars. The deeper they pushed into the throat, the heavier the air felt, charged with a strange static tension that made the hair on Sophia's arm stand up. The silence was absolute, save for the rhythmic crunch of boots and the whine of the exoskeleton servos, which seemed to grow louder in the confined acoustic space. Sophia checked her wrist. Her analog diving watch ticked steadily. 0245 Zulu. She glanced at the compass on her wrist strap. The needle was trembling, swaying sluggishly between north and northeast. "Lieutenant," Sophia whispered, bypassing the radio and speaking directly to Graves's back. "Compass is drifting. High magnetite concentration in these rocks. We need to verify our grid." "My attack is solid Martinez. I have a satellite lock," Graves replied, though his voice sounded tinny in her earpiece. He tapped the glowing screen mounted to his chest rig. "We're 200 meters from the debris field." "Copy," Sophia murmured, though her gut twisted. She knew about the mineral deposits in this region. They didn't just mess with compasses. They created jamming fields for anything relying on delicate radio frequencies. 10 steps later, the glitch started. It began as a low-frequency hum in their headsets, a feedback loop that quickly escalated into a screech. Graves stumbled, ripping his earpiece out. "Break, break, comms are washing out," Miller shouted, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Reboot systems," Graves ordered, stopping the column. "Davis, check the uplink." "I've lost the drone feed, sir." "Screen is snow," Davis replied, frantically tapping his forearm controller. "GPS is spinning. It says we're in the middle of the Red Sea." Suddenly, the green glow of the night vision spilled out from under Miller's helmet. "What the hell? My HUD just strobed. I can't see the reticle. My scope is rebooting." The advanced smart scopes on their rifles' optics designed to calculate wind range and lead automatically were flickering. The digital overlays that identified friend from foe were ghosting, creating double images that induced nausea. The canyon was a Faraday cage, and they had just walked into the trap. "Switch to iron sights, analog backup." Graves roared, his composure cracking for the first time. Eyes open, scan the ridgeline. But they couldn't scan, their eyes accustomed to the artificial brilliance of white phosphorus tubes and thermal overlays, struggled to adjust to the sudden oppressive darkness of the canyon floor. They were looking for digital outlines for red diamonds marking targets. There were none. Crack. The sound was dry, sharp, and terrifyingly close. It wasn't the roar of an AK-47, but the distinct whip crack of a high-velocity round breaking the sound barrier. Thwack. Davis, the comm specialist, was spun around violently. The round impacted the side of his heavy backpack, shattering the radio unit and sending shrapnel slicing through the straps. He hit the ground hard, gasping for air. "Man down, contact front," Miller screamed, raising his MK-20 and firing a burst of 7.62mm rounds blindly into the darkness ahead. "Cease fire, identify the target," Graves yelled, dragging Davis behind a slab of fallen rock. "Where is it coming from?" "I don't know, my thermal is dead. I can't see a muzzle flash." Miller panicked, sweeping his rifle back and forth. The canyon walls echoed the gunshot, making it sound like the fire was coming from everywhere at once. Sophia was already on the ground. She hadn't fired. She hadn't moved. She lay prone in the dust, pressing her cheek against the stock of her M24. She closed her eyes for a split second, replaying the sound in her mind. Snap. Boom. The delay between the supersonic snap of the bullet passing and the boom of the rifle was roughly half a second. Distance 500 meters. Sophia called out, her voice calm amidst the shouting. "Elevation, high. 2 o'clock high." "How do you know?" Graves shouted, checking Davis for blood. "We have no sensors." "Sound," Sophia said, opening her eyes and looking through her scope. It was just glass. No batteries, no overlay, just magnification and a mild dot reticle etched into the lens. "The echo delay. He's high up. On the shelf." Another shot rang out. Crack. Sparks showered from the rock, inches from Graves' head. The sniper wasn't missing. He was hurting them. Move, get to cover, Graves ordered. The team scrambled into a shallow depression, a dry washout, protected by a rim of shale. They were huddled together, their high-tech exoskeletons scraping loudly against the rocks. The expensive situational awareness gear was now just dead-weight flashing error messages. Sophia low-crawled to the edge of the depression. She wiped the dust from her objective lens with her thumb. "He's got us pinned," she whispered, "and he knows exactly where our blind spots are." The SEALs were looking at their blank screens, their advantage stripped away. For the first time, they looked at Sophia not with mockery, but with a desperate realization that the only thing working in this valley was the bolt-action rifle they had laughed at an hour ago. The depression in the canyon floor offered cover, but it was quickly becoming a cage. "Suppressing dumping mag!" Miller roared, rising just enough to unleash a torrent of fire toward the northern ridge. His MK-20 chattered violently, ejecting brass casings that rained down onto Sophia's helmet. Beside him, two other operators joined in turning the dark cliff face into a sparkling display of ricochets and stone shards. It was a wall of lead. It was aggressive, loud, and terrifying. It was also completely useless. Sophia lay still, her body pressed into the dirt, ignoring the hot brass burning her neck. She didn't fire. She watched. Through the clarity of her German-made glass, she scanned the ridge sector by agonizing sector. The SEALs were firing at the likely spots, the crests, the obvious boulders, the silhouette lines. They were fighting the textbook way established fire, superiority maneuver, eliminate. But the enemy wasn't reading the textbook. "Cease fire, save your rounds," Graves barked, pulling Miller back down. "Did we get him?" Silence returned to the valley, heavier than before. The dust from their volley hung in the stagnant air, obscuring the view. Crack. The bullet struck the rock inches from Miller's boot, sending a razor-sharp fragment of granite into his calf. He yelped, rolling back, cursing. "He's still there! How is he still there?" Miller shouted, tying a tourniquet around his leg with shaking hands. "I saturated that whole sector." "He's not on the crest," Sophia said. Her voice was flat, cutting through the panic. "He's deep in the rock." Graves crawled over to her, his face streaked with dust. "What do you see, Martinez?" "No muzzle flash," Sophia explained, not taking her eye off the scope. "No heat signature for your sensors because he's firing through a thermal blanket or wet canvas. And no angle for your return fire." She adjusted her focus knob. "He's using a loophole." "A what?" "A loophole. A murder hole," Sophia murmured. "He's removed a single rock from a pile deep in a fissure. He's sitting 5 feet back inside a cave or a crevice. He's shooting through a hole no bigger than a fist. The flash is hidden inside the rock. The sound is baffled." She pointed a gloved finger toward a dark, nondescript shadow about 600 meters up and to the left of where the SEALs had been firing. Sector 4, that vertical fissure, third shadow down. "I don't see anything." Graves squinted. "You won't," Sophia said. "Not until he fires. But when he does, you'll see a disturbance in the dust right at the mouth of that hole. Just a puff. That's him. If he's behind that much rock, my 7.62 won't touch him." Graves realized, his voice dropping. The realization hit him hard. Their semi-automatic rifles were designed for volume and speed, effective against combatants in the open or behind light cover. Against a sniper entrenched deep within a geological formation, they were throwing pebbles. "We can't move," Graves whispered, the tactical reality sinking in. "If we lift our heads, he picks us off. If we stay, he waits until dawn and calls in his friends." Sophia looked at the chaotic spread of the SEAL team. They were bunched up, their heavy gear clanking, their breathing loud. They were a single fat target. "He's focused on the group," Sophia said, shifting her weight. She ran her hand along the bolt of her rifle. "He's watching the massive heat signatures. He's not looking for a cold spot." "What are you thinking, Sergeant?" "I need an angle," Sophia said, retracting the bipod legs of her rifle. "I can't hit the loophole from here. The trajectory is too flat. I need to get higher. I need to get perpendicular to that fissure." "You want to go out there?" Miller hissed through gritted teeth. "Alone with that bolt gun?" "That bolt gun shoots a 220-grain projectile," Sophia said calmly. "It will punch through the rock edge of that loophole. Your rifles won't." She looked at Graves. "I'm going to crawl out the back of this washout. I'll circle wide, climb the chimney to the east. It's the only way to get a line of sight inside his hide. That chimney is vertical, Martinez. It's a 100-foot free solo, Graves warned. And if he spots me, you guys move. She cut him off. But right now we are dying by inches. She didn't wait for permission. She knew the ROE rules of engagement allowed for self-preservation, and right now this was the only path to it. She rolled onto her back, unclipped her chest rig, and stripped off her pack, leaving only her ammo pouch and her water bladder. "Cover me with noise if I signal," she said. Then she slithered backward into the darkness, moving like a reptile, leaving the safety of the armor and the firepower behind. For the first time since the mission began, she felt light. The heavy tech was gone. It was just her, the rifle, and the mountain. The darkness beyond the washout was not empty. It was heavy with the threat of observation. Sophia moved through it not by rushing, but by flowing her body low to the ground, mimicking the contours of the broken shale. In her earpiece, Lieutenant Graves's voice was a constant, anxious drone. "Martinez, hold position. You are moving outside the defensive perimeter. I repeat, hold position. We cannot cover you past the 20-meter line." Sophia ignored the command, though every instinct drilled into her during basic training screamed at her to obey an officer. But the lieutenant was thinking in terms of overlapping fields of fire and mutual support. He was thinking like a hammer. This situation required a needle. She reached a cluster of boulders that marked the edge of the team's visual range. Beyond this lay 50 meters of open ground, a fatal funnel before the base of the eastern cliff face. "Martinez, do you copy RTB immediately?" Graves hissed, his voice rising in pitch. "That is a direct order. You are walking into a kill zone." Sophia paused, pressing her back against the cold granite. The radio chatter was a distraction. It was noise. It was fear transmitted over a frequency. To hunt a ghost, she had to become one, and ghosts didn't wear headsets. She reached up to her chest rig, found the connection lead for her radio, and pulled. The click was audible only to her. The static in her ear died instantly. Silence. For the first time since the insertion, the world sharpened. Without the electronic hum of the comms, she could hear the wind whistling through the dry brush. She could hear the shifting of sand. She could hear her own heartbeat, slow and rhythmic. She checked her gear. She had stripped everything non-essential. No plate carrier to restrict her breathing. No ballistic helmet to throw off her balance, just a boonie hat to break up the outline of her head. The SEALs with their 80-pound loads and hydraulic legs would have sunk into the soft sand of the wash or snagged their external frames on the low-hanging scrub. They were built for the door-kicking violence of close-quarters battle, CQB. They were tanks. She was a coyote. Sophia took a breath, visualizing the path across the open ground. Concealment, not cover, she reminded herself. The shadows would hide her from sight, but they wouldn't stop a bullet. She moved. She didn't run. Running attracted the eye. She moved with a high-step gait, placing her toes down first to feel for twigs or loose rocks, rolling her weight forward silently. It took her 10 agonizing minutes to cross 50 meters. Every time the wind died, she froze, becoming just another rock in a landscape of rocks. She reached the base of the cliff. The chimney was a vertical fissure in the rock face about 3 feet wide, rising straight up into the gloom. It was a geological scar that led to the crow's nest, a small shelf overlooking the sniper's loophole. She looked up. It was 80 feet of vertical climbing. No ropes, no safety. She slung her M24 across her back, tightening the strap so the rifle wouldn't swing and clang against the stone. She stepped into the fissure. This was where the antiquated nature of her gear became her salvation. If she had been wearing an exoskeleton, the metal servos would have ground against the rock, echoing like a dinner bell. If she had been wearing ceramic plates, the bulk would have wedged her tight, unable to maneuver. Sophia placed her back against one wall of the fissure and her feet against the other. She pushed outward, the tension holding her in place, suspended over the darkness. Stemming, a basic climbing technique. She began to ascend. Push with the legs, slide the back up. Push, slide. Push, slide. 10 feet up. The air grew colder. 20 feet. Her quadriceps began to burn. Below her, the depression where the SEALs were pinned was silent. She wondered if they realized she had cut them off. They were probably cursing her name, calling her a rogue element, a liability. Let them. 30 feet. Her hand slipped on a patch of slick lichen. She gasped, her boots scrabbling for purchase, sending a shower of pebbles clattering down the chimney. The sound was small, but in the amphitheater of the canyon, it sounded like a landslide. Sophia froze, pressing herself flat against the rock, her muscles trembling with the isometric strain. She waited for the crack of a rifle. She waited for the impact. Nothing happened. The wind howled through the gap, masking the sound of her mistake. She exhaled the breath shuddering out of her. She looked down. The ground was a dark blur. If she fell, the impact would kill her long before the enemy did. There was no medevac, no backup, just the gravity she had defied and the men she had left behind. She looked up. The stars were visible now, a sliver of the universe caught between the canyon walls. She wasn't carrying a computer on her chest or a battery pack on her waist. She was carrying the weight of 6 lives. Sophia pushed again. Upward. Always upward. Toward the kill. The chimney was not a mile high, but in the crushing dark, with lactic acid flooding her muscles, every inch felt like a marathon. Sophia was 40 feet up now, wedged between 2 slabs of cold granite that smelled of ancient dust and iron. Her breathing was a ragged rasp loud in her own ears, but hopefully swallowed by the wind howling through the gap. The stemming technique, pressing her back against one wall and her boots against the other, relied entirely on friction and tension. If her legs shook too much, the tension would break. If the tension broke, she dropped. She didn't have the mechanical assistance of the SEAL's exoskeletons. She had quadriceps honed by years of running hills in full kit and a core tightened by sheer will. Yet the weight of the M24 rifle strapped to her back was a lever working against her. The long barrel, designed for stability, was now a liability, catching on protrusions, threatening to peel her off the wall. Push, slide, lock. Sweat stung her eyes. The salt mixed with the grit of the rock, blurring her vision. She couldn't wipe it away. Both hands were pressing against the stone for balance. 50 feet. A cramp seized her left calf, a knot of pain so sharp she almost cried out. She bit her lip, tasting blood, forcing the muscle to hold. Below the canyon floor was a pool of ink. There was no sound of gunfire anymore. That was worse. Silence meant maneuvering. It meant the enemy sniper was either waiting or moving to finish the job. Graves and the others were sitting ducks, their high-tech eyes blind, waiting for a savior they had mocked. Sophia focused on the patch of lighter sky above her. Just get to the shelf. She reached up her fingers, searching for a hold. She found a jagged lip of rock and committed her weight, pulling herself up. Scrunch! The sound was sickening. As she hauled her body upward, the steel muzzle brake of her rifle scraped against the rock wall. The metallic screech echoed like a scream in a library. Sophia froze. She hung there, one hand gripping the ledge, her feet dangling for a split second before she found purchase again. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She waited. 10 seconds. 20. Had he heard it? The enemy sniper was a professional. She knew that from his shot placement. He would be listening for the crunch of boots, the clatter of gear. A metallic scrape in a canyon of stone was a foreign sound. It was a signature. A sudden gust of wind ripped through the chimney, whistling mournfully. Cover noise. Thank God for the wind. She resumed the climb, slower now, agonizingly deliberate. She treated her body as a machine, silencing the pain signals. 60 feet, 70. The top of the fissure widened. She could see the shelf, the crow's nest. It was a narrow ledge, barely wide enough for a prone shooter, shielded by a natural parapet of rock. It was the perfect hide. With a final gasping effort, Sophia hooked her elbow over the rim and dragged herself onto the flat stone. She rolled away from the edge, lying on her back, staring up at the stars. Her chest heaved. Her limbs felt like lead. She wanted to close her eyes just for a minute. No time. She rolled onto her stomach, slithering toward the edge of the parapet. She moved her rifle slowly, unstrapping it from her back and sliding it forward through the dust. She deployed the bipod legs, settling them into the dirt. She didn't look through the scope yet. She used her naked eyes to scan the terrain below. From this height, the perspective was radically different. The canyon was a jagged scar. To her right, she could see the dark depression where Echo Team was pinned. To her left, across the gap, lay the enemy's ridge. And there it was. From the valley floor, the enemy position looked like a solid wall of rock. But from here at an oblique angle, she could see the depth. There was a fissure, a deep vertical crack in the cliff face, and deep inside that crack, shielded from the front but exposed to the side, was a platform. She saw a flicker of movement. Not a person, but a shadow shifting within a shadow. Sophia pressed her eye to the rubber cup of her scope. The glass was clear, unburdened by digital grain. She dialed the focus ring. There. A rifle barrel wrapped in burlap protruding just inches from a pile of rocks deep in the fissure. Behind it, the dark shape of a man lying prone. He was watching the seals. He was waiting for one of them to panic and lift their head. Sophia checked her turret. The range was longer than she had estimated from the ground. The angle was steep, shooting downward at 30 degrees. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small laminated card. Her dope card. No ballistic computer. Just data she had verified on the range. Angle cosine, drag coefficient, spin drift. She did the math in her head, her lips moving silently. She adjusted the elevation turret. Click, click, click. She adjusted the windage. Her hands were still shaking from the climb. She couldn't take the shot like this. If she missed, he would spot the muzzle flash from her position. He would rotate his rifle, and at this range, he wouldn't miss. She closed her eyes, visualizing her heart rate slowing down. She employed the breathing technique: inhale 4 seconds, hold 4 seconds, exhale 4 seconds. The shaking in her hands began to subside. The world narrowed down to the crosshairs and the shadow in the rock. She was no longer the antique. She was the predator. The world inside the scope was a detached reality. Through the circle of glass, Sophia watched the enemy sniper adjust his position. He was good. He remained deep in the shadow of the fissure, his barrel resting on a sandbag that matched the color of the rock perfectly. He was patient, waiting for the SEALs to make a mistake. Sophia checked her data card again. Range 180 meters. Angle 32 degrees down. Gravity was a constant, but physics played tricks in the mountains. Shooting downhill meant the bullet would impact high if she didn't compensate. The gravity only acted on the horizontal distance, not the slant range. She dialed her elevation turret down, subtracting 3 minutes of angle MOA. The clicks were crisp, tactile, mechanical precision in a chaotic world. But the wind was the variable that killed. She watched the heat waves, the mirage shimmering off the rocks on the canyon floor. At 400 meters, the mirage was boiling straight up. No wind. At 800 meters near the canyon bend, the dust was drifting left to right. At the target 1,200 meters away, a small shrub growing out of the cliff face was bending right to left. A crosswind, a swirling, treacherous vortex caused by the canyon's geometry. "Come on," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Show me." Down below, the silence broke. The enemy sniper fired again. Crack. Through her scope, she saw the dust puff at the loophole. She shifted her gaze to the SEAL's position. A rock shattered near Lieutenant Graves' head. He scrambled backward, shouting something into a dead radio. They were getting restless. They were about to try a breakout. If they moved now, they would be cut to pieces. "Don't do it!" Sophia hissed. "Stay down!" She needed the wind to settle, just for 3 seconds. Her finger rested on the trigger guard, not the trigger. Her breathing slowed to a metabolic crawl. Inhale, exhale, pause. The shrub near the target stopped bending. The dust at the bend settled. The valley held its breath. This was the lull, the moment of equilibrium between thermal shifts. Sophia slid her finger onto the trigger. The pad of her index finger found the sweet spot. She applied pressure. Her rifle, the M24, had a trigger pull set to exactly 2.5 pounds. It was crisp, like breaking a glass rod. She didn't think about the recoil. She didn't think about the kill. She thought about the math. 1,180 meters. Flight time roughly 1.6 seconds. She exhaled half her breath and held it. The crosshairs settled on the dark void just behind the enemy's rifle. Squeeze! The rifle surged backward, a violent kick into her shoulder that she rode with practiced ease. The suppressor mitigated the roar to a sharp hiss, but the shockwave kicked up a cloud of dust around her hide. She didn't blink. She kept her eye glued to the scope, fighting the recoil to spot her trace. She saw the vapor trail of the bullet, a distortion in the air, arching high over the valley floor, plunging downward like a hawk. 1 Mississippi. The bullet was a 220-grain Sierra Match King. It was heavy, stable, and carried enough kinetic energy to crack an engine block. 2 misses. Impact. There was no explosion, no cinematic fireball, just a sudden violent spray of pink mist erupting from the shadows of the fissure. The enemy rifle jerked upward, clattering against the rock, then slid forward, tumbling out of the loophole and falling hundreds of feet to the canyon floor. The body behind it did not move. "Target down," Sophia whispered to no one. She cycled the bolt immediately. Click-clack. The empty brass casing spun out, glinting in the starlight, hot and smoking. She chambered afresh round her eyes, scanning for a second target. A spotter, a security element. Nothing. The fissure was still. Below, the reaction was immediate. The SEALs, realizing the incoming fire had stopped and seeing the enemy rifle fall past them, broke cover. Graves was pointing up at the cliff at the impossible height of the crow's nest. He was looking for her. Sophia didn't wave. She didn't celebrate. She dialed her scope back to 0. The shot was made, but the sound of her heavy-caliber rifle echoing off the canyon walls had just announced her position to every living thing in a 5-mile radius. The silence returned, but this time it felt fragile. She had cleared the path, but in doing so, she had rung the dinner bell. She pulled her rifle back from the edge, sliding deeper into the shadow of the shelf. The easy part was over. Now she had to survive the consequences. From the crow's nest, the battlefield looked like a diorama of chaos. Below, the SEALs were moving with renewed aggression. With the sniper threat eliminated, they had switched back to their primary doctrine, speed and violence of action. They bounded across the open ground, moving in pairs, one firing, one moving toward the flat plateau, designated as the primary extraction zone. They looked efficient again, their confidence returning as they closed in on the exit. But Sophia wasn't looking at the SEALs. She was watching the dust cloud rising from the north. 2 Toyota Hilux pickups, their beds modified with heavy machine gun mounts, tore around the bend of the canyon. They screeched to a halt behind a low ridge line, shielded from the SEALs' line of sight, but perfectly visible from Sophia's elevation. Men poured out of the trucks. They weren't ragtag militia. They moved with purpose. Sophia adjusted her scope, her heart sinking. They were not just infantry. 3 men were dragging a heavy steel base plate from the back of the truck. Another carried a long olive drab tube. "Mortars!" she whispered, a cold dread washing over her. It was an 82mm system. Simple, brutal, and indirect. They were setting up in a defilade, a depression behind the ridge. The SEALs couldn't see them. Graves and his team were sprinting toward the LZ, completely unaware that they were running into a pre-registered kill box. If that mortar team dropped a single round into the LZ while the helicopter was on the ground, it wouldn't just be a mission failure, it would be a mass casualty event. Sophia watched the enemy gunner seat the base plate into the dirt. The assistant gunner was already prepping the rounds, twisting the safety caps off the fuses. They were efficient. They would have a firing solution in less than 30 seconds. She looked at her radio. The wire was still disconnected. She couldn't warn them. Even if she could, the SEALs couldn't hit a target behind a ridge. She was the only one with the angle. Sophia checked her magazine. 3 rounds left. She reached into her pouch and loaded 2 more, topping it off to 5. If I shoot, she thought, the tactical calculus running instantly in her mind. The technicals will see the flash. They have PKMs. They will turn that ridge into gravel. She looked down at the SEALs. Miller was limping, supported by another operator. They were almost at the LZ. They thought they had won. They thought the antique had done her job, and they could go home. The mortar gunner held a round over the tube. He was hanging it, waiting for the command to drop. Sophia didn't hesitate. She didn't think about the PKMs or the isolation. She thought about the math. Range 800 meters. Wind holding steady. She settled the crosshairs on the chest of the man holding the mortar shell. Crack. The rifle bucked. The man crumpled instantly, dropping the mortar round. It didn't explode. The safety features prevented that, but the rhythm of the crew was shattered. The other 2 crew members froze, looking around wildly. Crack. Sophia cycled the bolt and fired again. The gunner, reaching for the tube, spun around and fell over the base plate. The element of surprise was gone. The heavy machine guns on the technicals spun around, searching for the source of the fire. At night, a muzzle flash from a high-powered rifle looked like a camera strobe. "There on the cliff," a voice shouted in Arabic, drifting up on the wind. Sophia saw the barrel of a DSHK heavy machine gun elevate toward her position. The muzzle aperture looked like a black eye staring straight at her soul. She had stopped the first mortar round, but now she was the primary target of a heavy weapons platoon. She slammed the bolt forward on a fresh round. She had to keep the mortar down until the bird landed. "Come and get it," she whispered, pressing her cheek into the stock as the first tracers began to zip past her head like angry fireflies. The rock face exploded. A burst of 12.7mm rounds from the DSK slammed into the parapet of the crow's nest, sending razor-sharp shards of granite spinning into the air. Sophia curled into a ball, pressing her face into the dirt as the shock waves reverberated through her chest. The sound was a physical assault, a deafening rhythmic thump, thump, thump that pulverized the stone inches from her head. Debris rained down on her. A jagged piece of shale sliced through her sleeve, drawing a line of hot blood across her forearm. She didn't flinch. She was counting. 1, 2, 3. Pause. The gunner on the technical was reloading or letting the barrel cool. Sophia scrambled back up to the scope. Her ears were ringing a high-pitched whine that drowned out the wind. Through the dust-choked optics, she saw movement in the defilade. The mortar crew had replaced the gunner. A new man was cranking the elevation handle, angling the tube toward the flat plateau where the seals were popping green smoke. They were ignoring her. They had realized she was just one rifle and the real prize, the extraction helicopter, was inbound. She could hear it now, the distinct whop, whop, whop of the Black Hawk's rotors echoing off the canyon walls. It was low, hugging the terrain, coming in fast. "No," Sophia hissed, wiping dust from her eye. "Don't look at them. Look at me." She cycled the bolt. She fired. The round struck the mortar base plate, sparking violently, but the angle was bad. She missed the operator. The mortar crew didn't flinch. They dropped a round into the tube. Thump. The mortar round launched. Sophia watched it arc high unseen against the black sky. Seconds later, a dull explosion erupted 200 meters short of the LZ, a ranging shot. The next one would be on target. The technicals were turning too. The heavy machine guns were swiveling away from the cliff, tracking the sound of the approaching helicopter. The SEALs were exposed, waiting for the bird to touch down. If those DSHKs opened up on the hovering aircraft, it would turn into a fireball. Sophia reached into a small pouch on her belt. Her fingers closed around a single cartridge. The tip was painted orange. A tracer. Snipers never used tracers. They worked both ways. A tracer was a line of light that pointed directly back to the shooter. It was a death sentence. But right now, she didn't need to be hidden. She needed to be the brightest thing in the valley. She ejected her current magazine, stripped the top round, and thumbed the tracer into the chamber. She slammed the bolt home. "Eyes on me," she whispered. She didn't aim for the mortar crew this time. She aimed for the engine block of the lead technical. She needed a hard target, something that would spark and flash. She steadied her breath, ignoring the burning in her lungs and the blood trickling down her arm. She found the grill of the truck. Squeeze. The rifle roared. The tracer ignited instantly upon leaving the barrel. A streak of burning magnesium tore through the darkness, a brilliant, undeniable red laser beam connecting the crow's nest to the valley floor. It was spectacular, and it was suicidal. The round smashed into the truck's radiator, but the damage was irrelevant. The effect was psychological. Every enemy head snapped up toward the cliff. The line of red light lingered in their retinas, a giant arrow pointing to her hiding spot. There! The sniper! The response was apocalyptic. Both technicals abandoned their search for the helicopter and swung their heavy guns back toward the cliff. The infantry, seeing the tracer, opened up with AK-47s. The air around Sophia turned into a storm of lead. The DSK rounds hammered the cliff face, tearing chunks of rock the size of softballs out of the shelf. She rolled backward, abandoning the rifle, pressing herself flat into the deepest recess of the ledge. The noise was overwhelming. It felt as if the mountain itself was being torn apart. Below, the Black Hawk flared its wheels, touching the dust of the LZ. The door gunners unleashed their miniguns, buzzing like angry chainsaws, but they were engaging the infantry closest to the landing zone. They couldn't suppress the heavy guns in the defilade, but the heavy guns weren't firing at the bird. They were obsessed with the red streak that had come from the sky. They were pouring hate into the empty rock where Sophia had been seconds ago. She lay in the dirt, covering her head with her hands, her body bouncing slightly with every impact that shook the ledge. She had done it. She had become the magnet. She closed her eyes, visualizing the SEALs boarding the helicopter. She pictured Graves, Miller, Davis, hauling their gear, their exoskeletons whining, scrambling into the safety of the cabin. Get out. Just get out. The firing didn't stop. It intensified. The enemy was furious, determined to scour the cliff face until nothing lived. Sophia felt a sharp blow to her boot as a ricochet tore through the leather. She didn't move. There was nowhere to go. She was trapped on an island of stone, drowning in a sea of fire. The rotor wash of the MH-60 Blackhawk whipped the desert floor into a blinding, choking brownout. Inside the swirling vortex of dust, the world was reduced to hand signals and the frantic urgency of survival. Go, go, move your asses! The crew chief screamed, hauling Miller onto the deck of the helicopter. Miller scrambled inside his leg, dragging his exoskeleton, battered and covered in dust. He collapsed onto the canvas seat, gasping for air. Beside him, Davis and the rest of Echo Team piled in a tangle of limbs, weapons, and bruised egos. Lieutenant Graves was the last one on the ramp. He grabbed the frame of the door, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the rotor disc. He keyed his radio, shouting over the turbine whine. Martinez, status, we are wheels down, get to the bird static. Martinez, respond. High above them on the cliff face, the mountain was being disassembled. The tracer fire from the two technicals was converging on the crow's nest, like the spokes of a fiery wheel. The impacts were continuous, a strobe light of sparks and pulverized rock. Sophia lay amidst the rubble. Her left ear was deafened by the concussion of the DK rounds striking the rock. Her face was masked in blood and grit. She reached for her chest rig, her fingers fumbling with the connector she had severed hours ago. She jammed the jack back into the radio unit. Jackal 1-1, this is Sierra 2. Her voice was calm terrifyingly, so cutting through the chaos in Graves's headset. I am pinned. Heavy machine gun fire. Unable to maneuver. Suppress and move, Sergeant. Graves yelled, his knuckles white as he gripped the handle. We are not leaving you. Smoke is out. Run to the green. Sophia looked at the tracers slashing the air between her and the ground. It was an 800-foot drop, and the air was filled with lead. There was no running. If the helicopter stayed on the ground for another 20 seconds, the technicals would adjust their aim from her to the larger, softer target of the aircraft. She saw the nose of the helicopter dip slightly. The pilot was getting restless. He could see the tracers too. Negative, Jackal, Sophia said. She coughed, the dust coating her throat. My leg is broken. I am combat ineffective. It was a lie. Her legs were fine, but her position was a tomb. She had to give them a reason to let go. We will come get you, Miller shouted into the comms, trying to stand up, but the G-force of the rotors pushed him back. Pilot, lift off. Sophia ordered, her voice hardening with the authority she had never shown them in the briefing room. Code Black. The LZ is compromised. They are adjusting fire to your heat signature. Go, now. Sir, we have to go, the pilot screamed over the intercom to Graves. I'm taking fire on the tail boom. We're heavy. We have to leave. Graves looked at the cliff. He looked at the empty space on the bench opposite him, the space reserved for the antique sniper. Damn it, Graves slammed his fist against the fuselage. Punch it. Get us out. The engines roared, pitching to a high whine. The Blackhawk lurched upward, stomach churning and violent banking, hard to the west to put the canyon wall between them and the anti-aircraft guns. As the helicopter climbed, the dust cleared. The side door remained open. The SEALs sat in the red glow of the cabin lights, their chests heaving. They were alive. They had their high-tech gear, their digital optics, and their lives. But none of them looked at each other. They all looked out the door. From 2,000 feet up, the battlefield was a map of fire. They saw the two technicals still pouring streams of red tracers into the single high point on the cliff face. It looked like a volcano erupting in reverse. The sheer volume of hate being directed at that one shelf was staggering. And then they saw the response. From the center of that inferno, a single solitary muzzle flash sparked. Flash. 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 It was slow, rhythmic, bolt action. She's still fighting, Miller whispered, the mockery gone from his voice, replaced by a hollow, sick feeling in his gut. She's drawing them all. The pilot banked again, and the ridge disappeared from view, swallowed by the vast, indifferent darkness of the desert. Graves sat back, the vibration of the airframe rattling his teeth. He looked down at his Mk-20, the battery light blinking red. Low power. Useless. He looked at the empty seat where Sophia's bag should have been. He remembered his words in the hangar. "Don't slow us down. You're a burden." She hadn't slowed them down. She had been the only one who could keep up with the war. The cabin was silent save for the engine. It wasn't the silence of relief. It was the silence of men who realized they owed their lives to someone they hadn't bothered to thank. They were the elite, the tip of the spear, but tonight the spear had been guided by a ghost with a bolt-action rifle, who was now fighting her last stand alone in the dark. "RTB," Graves whispered into his mic, closing his eyes. "One operator. MIA." The radio remained silent. There were no more transmissions from the mountain.